The single most important $100 I ever invested wasn't really an investment when I look back at it. It was something else. It was the moment I stopped being someone who thinks about money and started being someone who actually has it. I was 23 years old. I had a job that paid almost nothing. I'd been reading about index funds on an early internet forum that doesn't exist anymore, and at some point that fall, I decided that I was going to put $100 a month into a Vanguard total market fund. The first automatic transfer happened on the 15th of November, 1998. $100, deducted from my checking account, deposited into a brokerage I'd opened the week before. Nothing about that $100 was going to change my life through compounding. Even after 27 years of market growth, those particular $100 are worth maybe $700 today. That's not nothing, but it's not the point. The point is what that $100 did to me. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance for normal people. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns. Just what the math actually does over time. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. Here's the thing about the first $100 a month that almost nobody on YouTube tells you correctly. Almost every video on this topic frames it as a math story. They show you a compound interest calculator. They tell you if you invest $100 a month for 40 years at 7%, you'll have about $240,000. The implication is that the first $100 matters because of what it eventually becomes. That's true. It's also not the real reason it matters. The real reason is something that doesn't show up on any compound interest calculator. And once you understand it, you stop treating the first $100 as optional and start treating it as the actual foundation that makes everything else possible. Let me walk through 5 specific things that change once you start, none of which are about the eventual dollar value of what you contribute. The first thing that changes is the way you think about yourself when you look at your accounts. Before the first $100 a month happens, money is something you receive, spend, and occasionally save. The relationship is essentially defensive. You're trying to keep enough of it around to cover your life, and if you have any left over at the end of the month, it sits in a checking account or a regular savings account, waiting for the next bill or the next emergency or the next thing you want to buy. The first $100 a month flips that relationship. Money becomes something that works for you, even if at first it's only barely working, even if the work it does in any given month is invisibly small. You stop being a person who only earns and spends. You become a person who deploys. That's a different category of human being, and it changes how you read your bank statements, how you think about a raise, how you respond when someone asks how things are going financially. I've watched this play out over the years in friends and in a few younger people I've helped get started. The day they set up their first automatic investment is the day they cross some kind of psychological line. Before that day, every conversation about money is about how they're holding on. After that day, every conversation is about where they're going. Same person, same income, completely different framing. The $100 didn't do that. What the $100 represents did. The second thing that changes is what you start to notice about your own spending. Here's what I mean. When you save money in a regular savings account, the money is still in the same broad category as the rest of your cash. It doesn't really feel like it's gone anywhere. So when you spend $40 on takeout, you don't think about it in relation to the $70 or $80 you've put away that week. They live in different mental compartments. When the $100 a month is automatically going into an investment account, the money has visibly left. It's somewhere else. It's working on a project that isn't your current month's spending, and the result is that you start noticing the leakage in your spending differently. You see a $40 takeout charge, and you involuntarily compare it to the $100 that you fought to set aside for the future. The math changes nothing. The framing changes everything. I knew a couple in their late 20s who told me that the single biggest budget shift in their early marriage didn't come from a budgeting app. It came from setting up a $50 each automatic investment at the start of each month. They didn't even raise the amount for 2 years. But that single act, they told me, changed how they looked at restaurant tabs, subscription renewals, and the small impulse purchases that used to slip through unnoticed. The $40 dinner started feeling like it had a cost they hadn't been seeing before. The $40 dinner had always had that cost. They just couldn't see it without something to compare it to. The third thing that changes is your relationship with risk. And this one is so important that it almost justifies starting at any amount, even $10 or $20 a month, just to have the experience early. When you put $100 a month into the market, that money goes up and down, sometimes a lot. The first time you check your account 3 months in and see that you've contributed $300, but the balance reads $270, something happens to you. You feel the loss in a way you've never felt about money before, because this is the first time you've watched a number you owned go down for reasons that weren't your fault. This is the most valuable financial experience you can have in your 20s, and it cannot be learned from articles or videos. You have to live through it. Because here's what almost every personal finance video skips over. The single biggest determinant of long-term investing success is not your stock picks, your asset allocation, or your fees. It's whether or not you panic sell during a downturn. And the only way to know that you can hold through a downturn is to have already held through one. The first $100 a month is the cheapest available tuition for that lesson. The downturns you live through with $300 or $400 in the account teach you the same emotional thing that a downturn at $300,000 would teach you, except the stakes are low enough that you can actually pay attention to your own reaction without your hands shaking. By the time the stakes are real, you've already learned what your stomach does when the number goes red. You've already learned that staying in is what produces the eventual recovery. This is the deepest reason to start small and start early. Not because the small amount will grow into a fortune through compounding, although it will help. The deeper reason is that the small amount lets you fail safely, observe yourself in a downturn, and develop the emotional muscle that makes you a viable investor at any scale that comes later. My own version of that lesson arrived in 2002. I'd been investing my $100 a month for nearly 4 years by then, which meant I had close to $5,000 of contributions in the account. And at the worst of the dot-com crash that fall, the balance had dropped to around $3,000. That was real money to me at 26. I remember opening the statement at my kitchen table and feeling genuinely sick. The part I didn't understand yet was that the right move in that moment was the move I happened to make, which was to do nothing. I kept the auto transfer going. Within a few years, the account had recovered and was past its previous high, and from there it just kept building. That single experience, in retrospect, was worth more than every investing book I ever read afterward. The $100 a month had bought me the cheapest possible version of that education. The fourth thing that changes is the cost of every increase that comes after. This one is structural, and it's the part that most people who haven't started don't understand yet. The hardest contribution to make, by an enormous margin, is the first one. Once the auto deposit is set up, once the account exists, once the money has started moving on the 15th of every month, increasing the contribution from 100 to 150 is almost a non-decision. 30 seconds online. The friction is gone. So the first $100 doesn't just buy you $100 in an investment account. It buys you a frictionless ramp to 200, to 300, to 1,000, eventually to maxing out an IRA at around $625 a month, eventually to maxing out a 401k at over $2,000 a month. Every increase is small. Every increase happens against the backdrop of an already existing infrastructure. The decision that was hard once becomes a series of decisions that are barely decisions at all. I see the opposite of this all the time. Someone reaches 40, hasn't started yet, and then has to mentally cross every threshold at once. They have to open the account, fund it, pick the investment, and commit to a number. Each of those is a small decision on its own. Stacked on top of each other, they become a wall. The person who started at 23 with $100 a month doesn't face that wall because they already walked through it a long time ago, when the only thing on the other side was a small contribution amount that nobody was checking on. The fifth thing that changes is what you start to see in your environment that was invisible before. When you're not an investor, the universe of financial opportunity is hidden. Tax-advantaged accounts are abstractions you've heard about. Employer matches are a paragraph in the new hire packet that you skimmed once. The difference between a Roth and a traditional IRA is a question you'd have to research from scratch, and the prospect of researching it feels heavy enough that you keep not doing it. Once $100 a month is moving into an investment account, all of that suddenly becomes legible. You start to notice the employer match because there's somewhere for it to actually go. The difference between account types becomes obvious because you now have an account, and the next account has a clear comparison point. The articles you used to skip over suddenly read like they're written for you. The vocabulary stops being a foreign language because you're now living inside the country where they speak it. A friend of mine, I'll call Mike, is the cleanest example of this I've seen. Mike got around to investing in his mid-30s. He had a good job for years before he started, and he had a 401k match available that he'd never gotten around to capturing. The enrollment form had been sitting in his inbox since orientation. He'd been at the job for nearly 12 years at that point, leaving roughly $3,000 a year of free money on the table the entire time. The day after he set up his first automatic Roth IRA contribution, he walked over to HR and filled out the 401k form. He told me later that he didn't actually understand it before. He had read the same paragraph in the new hire packet that everyone else reads, and it had bounced off him every time. Once he was inside the system, the language made sense. I want to be clear about what the first $100 a month does not do. It does not, by itself, make you wealthy. The math here is simple. $100 a month for 40 years at a 7% real return lands somewhere around $240,000. That's a real number, and it's better than nothing, but it is not retirement on its own. So if you're starting at $100 a month and expecting that single decision to fix your financial future, that's the wrong expectation. The first $100 a month is not the destination. It's the door you walk through to start moving toward the destination. What actually builds wealth is contribution scaling over time. The person who starts at $100 a month at 23 gets to $1,500 a month by 35, reaches $3,000 a month by 45, and maxes every available account by their early 50s. That person retires comfortably. The math compounds, the income grows, the accounts get captured. But all of that started with $100 a month, because none of the later steps were available to a person who hadn't yet started. That's the actual mechanism. The first $100 a month is the cheapest possible activation cost for a 30-year wealth building project. You're not buying wealth with that $100. You're buying the right to start the project. If you have not yet set up your first $100 a month, here's the actual sequence to make it happen this week. Because the decision-making energy you have right now while watching this video is the highest it will be for the next 3 months. Open a Roth IRA at one of the major no-fee brokerages, Fidelity, Schwab, or Vanguard, whichever you find easiest to navigate. 20 minutes online. Inside the IRA, set up an automatic transfer of $100 from your checking account on the day after your paycheck hits. Invest that $100 into a target date retirement fund, matching the year you'd turn 65. That's it. No further decisions required. The target date fund handles the asset allocation for you, rebalances automatically, and gets more conservative as you age. It won't optimize for anything beyond average market returns, which at your stage is exactly what you want. The single thing that derails this for most people is overthinking it. At $100 a month, the fund choice and the brokerage barely matter, and the exact day of the month doesn't matter at all. What matters is that the auto transfer exists by Friday and that you don't touch it. Everything else can be optimized later, once you're already inside the system. The honest reason to start with $100 a month isn't that it will make you rich. It's that a year from now, you will be a different kind of person about money. The thinking is different. The noticing is different. By then, you'll have lived through your first downturn and learned what you actually do when things go red, which is a thing you can't learn any other way. And one day, you'll write a $1,000 check into your investment account without it feeling like a leap, because you've already practiced the moves at a smaller scale. If you want a longer walkthrough of the basics that nobody actually taught you about how this whole system works, the accounts, the taxes, the whole landscape, I made a video on this channel called Financial Literacy in 30 Minutes. Watch that next. Drop a comment with how long ago you set up your first automatic investment, or what's been stopping you from setting one up. I read every one.